I'd like to share a personal story with you on how I got my first hit as a songwriter. I was a young, starving songwriter pounding the pavements in Los Angeles and not having a lot of luck. I was in a publisher's office one day and he had a couple of country hits, and he suggested I try my hand at country. Well, I didn't know much about country. In fact, I didn't even like country music. But I was desperate enough to try anything. So I went home and I started listening to the country station. And country in those days was country. Webb Pierce, Charlie Pride, I just didn't get it. But I listened, I kept listening, and finally I heard an artist called Marty Robbins. Now Marty Robbins was a more contemporary country singer, and I related to him. So I said, okay, I think I can do this. So I started writing my first country song. Well, it was harder than I thought. I just didn't quite have the feel for country yet, and I really had to work hard. But I finally came up with something that I really was excited about. It was a song called Just Married. And the first two lines go, just married this morning, how happy they are. Just married written on the window of their car. It had Marty Robbins written all over it. So I went into a demo studio. I did what I thought was a pretty good demo on it. And then my problem was, how do I get it to Marty Robbins? Well, I looked up, I knew he recorded for Columbia Records, so I looked up the Columbia Records, and being naive and being young and not understanding the subtleties of the business, I sent my song to Mr. Mitch Miller, president of Columbia Records, New York City, New York. Well, looking back, that was pretty funny. I should have sent it to Marty Robbins' producer in Nashville, at Columbia Records, Nashville. But I didn't know about those subtleties, so I sent it to the president of Columbia Records in New York. Well, to be honest with you, the chances that anyone would listen to that song were about the same as buying a lottery ticket today. And I waited expectantly, and of course, I heard nothing. About 3 months went by, and I came back to my aunt's house after a long day of fruitless labor, and she was all excited. She said, Barry, Mr. Mitch Miller has been calling you, and he wants you to call him as soon as you get home. I said, Mitch Miller? Oh my God, did he leave a number? Yes. I went into the house, I dialed Mitch Miller. He answered the phone. Well, of course he answered the phone. It was 8:30 in New York. He was probably the only one at Columbia Records. So I said, Mr. Miller, this is Barry DeVorzon. I understand you've been trying to reach me. He said, yes, Barry, you sent me a song called Just Married, and I've recorded this with one of our major artists. I said, oh, great. He said, I just want to know, what is the status of the song? I said, well, Mr. Miller, the status is it's your song. I mean, it's yours. Who did you record it with? He said, I recorded it with Marty Robbins. I will never forget that moment to this day. It was like a dream come true. I was speaking to the president of Columbia Records, and he had just recorded the song I wrote for Marty Robbins with Marty Robbins. Well, the rest just gets better. Marty Robbins took Just Married to #1 in the country charts. And it stayed there for 6 months. It was either #1 or #2. For 6 months. It was a giant country hit. Now, I'm beyond excited. Now I'm writing another song as a follow-up for Marty Robbins. And I worked and I labored and I finally came up with something I really liked called Treasure of Your Love. So I did a demo and I sent it to my new best friend, Mitch Miller, in New York City. About 2 weeks later, he called me. Barry, you know that song Treasure of Your Love you sent me? Yes, Mr. Miller. Well, I recorded it. Oh, wonderful. With Marty? No. With Eileen Rogers. I said, oh, Well, thanks, Mr. Miller, that's great. I hung up the phone and I was so crushed. Eileen Rogers. Who is Eileen Rogers? I never heard of her. I just was so disappointed because I thought it was a great follow-up for Marty Robbins. Anyway, Eileen Rogers had one hit in her entire career, and it was with my song, Treasure of Your Love. So by the time this young punk songwriter made it to New York, I went to Columbia Records, and Mr. Mitch Miller, the president of Columbia Records, took me around with his arm around my shoulder, introduced me to everyone, and said, "See this kid? I've had 2 major hits with him, and this is the first time we've met." Well, that's my story on how I got my first, well, 2 hits. Hope you enjoyed it.